Hi everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be a wrap up of all the books that I've read since March. So today is the 12th of June and I've read 17 books since the start of March. I'm not the best at doing monthly wrap-ups anyway because I feel like I don't read enough books to justify that, but I feel like I might have let it go on a little bit too long now because yeah, 17 books is quite a lot to go through. I'm going to try and show you all these books in a stack. Oh my gosh. And for the first time I actually have most of these books here because I've really been, oh, there they are. I've really been trying to read books that I already own because I had 50 books on my shelf downstairs which I hadn't read, and that's just way too much. So I've been mainly reading like just from the books that I already own, and then I've also got a few library books in there as well. So because this video is going to be probably quite long, I'm just gonna get straight on into it, and I'm gonna go from lowest to highest rating in today's video just because I feel like it makes sense rather than to go from like when I read them. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is one that I haven't actually rated because it's a non-fiction, and I did talk about it in a reading vlog, so I will just go over it kind of quickly. But the first one that I read in March was Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. Marmalade. He's playing with my books. Please don't do that. It is quite chunky, it's almost 500 pages long. As you might imagine from the title, this is basically an overview of Sapiens, humankind, but it spans a massive time period from like the Neanderthals right until present day. Obviously this is a massive topic, so to get all of this in 500 pages is quite an achievement, I think. I did find this book a little bit difficult to read sometimes, just because of how dense it is. Obviously it's an educational, informative book, so it wasn't the most like entertaining. I was listening to it a lot on audiobook as well, but because it's such a big topic, it whizzes through things really quickly, and if I zoned out for like 20 seconds, I felt like I was really lost and I didn't know what was going on. So I basically listened to a lot of this on audio, and then I went back to the book after and just like went through that chapter again. And then there's also a few like maps and diagrams and things, so I was doing that, and then it got to a point where I felt like I'd been reading it for ages, and I just sat down with the audiobook on a really fast speed, reading it like for 2-3 hours, and got to the end. And I did overall enjoy it, but there were a lot of bits in the middle especially that I didn't find as interesting. I really liked the stuff about farming and foraging, and why did we move to farming when foraging was supposedly quite a good life for us back in the day. And when it talks about all the reasons why sapiens have lasted as long as we have, about our language system and our desire for progress. So I thought it was okay, but it's nothing especially memorable for me. I'm not going to rate it on Goodreads because I can't really comment on the quality of it. So if it sounds like something that you would enjoy, then sure, give it a go, but I wouldn't widely recommend it because it's not the most riveting read. The next book is actually my least favourite book that I read since March, and it is The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. I thought this one would be a really high rating for me, so it is a little bit disappointing. In this book we're following an unnamed protagonist who is a writer, and she lives in this town which is kind of run by the memory police, and every so often somebody decides that a certain item or object is no longer in existence and everyone has to sort of get rid of that item. Then everyone kind of forgets it over time and they literally cannot remember it anymore. I didn't like this book because I found it very vague and very surface level. Sometimes I really like that in books, but for some reason this one just didn't work for me. I didn't really like the characters for a start. There's a bit of a romance going on that I just could not get on board with, and I found their lack of curiosity or desire to like find out what was going on so frustrating. I also read this in the same reading vlog that I read Sapiens, so I will link it down below so you can see my full thoughts because I did have a little bit of a rant about it. But basically nothing is really explained in this book in terms of why the memory police are there, how it actually works, people forgetting items, because our main character genuinely starts forgetting things, and when she'll see one of these items that's been sort of removed, she genuinely cannot recall what it is. And I get that that might just be a fantastical element that is not explained. It doesn't really dive into it very much. Our main character just accepts everything. She has like the best luck in the world because anytime there's any tension, it lasts for like 1 second and then something very convenient happens which resolves everything way too quickly. I did like the ending of this book. It tied in well with the story that you also get to read that the protagonist is writing, but the rest of it, I just felt like I came out of it with nothing. It didn't really make me think very much. I didn't like it and I needed a little bit more from it. So yeah, this one has got 2 stars from me. Now we're going to move on to my 3-star books, which I have quite a lot of them. There was a little bit of a stint in May, like I've just got over this little phase now where everything I was reading was 3 stars, and it did put me in a bit of a funk. But the first one I have here is A Flicker in the Dark by Stacy Willingham. And this book is about a girl called Chloe, and when Chloe was 12, her dad was found to be a serial killer, and he was convicted and put in jail and everything. And now we're following Chloe as an adult, and she's moved away from this town where it all happened and she's trying to move on with her life. But then on the anniversary of her dad being caught or convicted, more girls start going missing in a very similar way. This book was okay. It was fine. I read a lot of it on audiobook. Chloe's a bit of an unreliable narrator because a lot of the time she takes pills and she drinks and stuff. So it gave me those like Girl on the Train vibes where you can't really trust the main character. So I did like that, and it was pretty like suspenseful and it throws a lot of like red herrings in there. However, I predicted the twist in like chapter 3. So when the twist happened, I was just like, great, I already knew that. I could have told you that like 300 pages ago. And I don't like when thrillers do this kind of twist. So it was fine. It was good for like easy listening. I'm going to read her other book though because the writing was okay. There were a few like cheesy bits where it mentions like a flicker in the dark a lot. So I will read from this author again, and hopefully I enjoy it a little bit more. The next one I have here I read literally just after that, and it is also a book about a girl whose dad is a serial killer. This is Just Like Home by Gailey. In this book we're following Vera, who's now an adult, but when she was a child her dad was convicted of being a killer. So very similar premise, but in this one Vera has returned home to look after her dying mum, and there's something kind of weird about this house. The mum has preserved a lot of it, and she invites creative people, so like artists and writers, to stay in this house so they can be like inspired by what happened there. So it's kind of horror, kind of mystery. It's sort of slow burn, but I was really enjoying this book, and then it got a little bit too weird for me. I like the direction that it went in a sense, because it's completely bizarre and not what you would expect when you first go into this book. And a lot of it was really genuinely creepy because there's a lot of like haunted house vibes. There's flashbacks to when she was a child, which were like my favourite parts, which shows her relationship with her dad, which I really loved. It's hard to explain because I did like the ending, because I could like respect this author's choice. I don't know, I feel like something was stopping it from reaching anything over than a 3. It's well written, it's creepy, and it's pretty dark as well actually. So if you like all those things and you don't mind your horror getting a little bit weird, then you might enjoy this one. The next one I have here is also a 3-star, and it's Reprieve by James Mattson. I think I mentioned this in my 5-star predictions video, so unfortunately this one did not meet my expectations for it. This one is a literary horror which has a lot of social commentary in it, which is the bit that I liked about this book. So it's about a full contact escape room. Obviously there's some boundaries there and it can't go too far, but people do come out of this like traumatized and physically hurt. So in this book we've got 4 characters who have volunteered to go and do this, because you do win quite a lot of money if you get through all of the 6 rooms. Most of this book is about the characters' lives though. The actual escape room happens in very, very small chapters throughout the book, and if you're reading it purely for that, then you're probably not going to like this book. So during this escape room, one of the contestants dies, and we don't know how, we don't know who it is. There's a few characters that I really liked reading from, mainly Leonard, surprisingly. So Leonard is this guy who, he's got a really good life and he's got this partner, and then he meets the owner of this escape room, and the conversations that the owner and Leonard have make Leonard become really misogynistic, and it talks a lot about racial fetishism with that. We also follow an American student from Thailand who's really struggling to fit in, and there's all these conversations about how he is sort of pretending to be American and how embarrassing it is. And none of these characters are especially likeable, but they are interesting. And yeah, it talks a lot about race and class, sexuality, all these kinds of social things that don't really fit with the escape room story much. Like for some reason it didn't all mesh together how I wanted it to. I didn't really understand the ending, I didn't understand the motives. I did enjoy mainly the commentary story, but the actual plot was a little bit lackluster. But I did like how this house, this escape room, felt very real. It felt like a character in itself. It had a real presence. So there's a lot of things that I did like about this book, but for some reason it didn't really all pay off for me. The next one was one that I borrowed from my sister, so I don't actually have it with me now, but it was The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. So this is about a guy called Nate and his wife and their son. Nate has just inherited his childhood home, but he's a little bit reluctant to go because when Nate was a child, his dad was very abusive towards him, so he doesn't have the best memories about this house and about this very small town. But the family decide to go there anyway because it's like a big house, it's like a new start for everybody. And then some like weird haunted house things start happening. I liked the overall concept of this book because it felt very large in scale almost. As the story goes on, it gets much bigger in scope than you might first expect, but I found that I didn't really care as much about the characters as I would have liked. It is a slightly longer book. I can't remember exactly how many pages it is, but it was quite long and I felt like I should have loved the characters a little bit more than I did. The wife I found really annoying. You know those people who swear but it almost doesn't feel natural for them to swear? They'll like shove the F word in where it's not needed. Like, I'm all for a good swear word, but it has to fit, like it has to match what's going on. And that was one of her main personality traits, was just the fact that she swears and she's so like rebellious. And I also found the son like way too naive, and I found the villain in this book super cheesy and not really in a good way. I also didn't find it very scary. So I'm listing off quite a lot of negatives here, but I did like the writing overall, and I liked Nate as a character. And my favourite part about this book is how it all came together and how everything was all explained. Like, it's all very clever. It just felt like a good payoff, but I think everything else I just didn't really care much for. So I've ended up with a 3-star for this one just because it was okay, but it's nothing like really special or memorable. So we're now moving from the 3 stars to the 3.5 stars. And there's also quite a few of these. The first one that I will mention is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. This is similar in a way to The Memory Police, which I mentioned earlier, because it is also a strange, subtle, quiet sort of dystopian book. This is about, again, an unnamed character, I think, who lives in this cage with 39 other women. She's lived there ever since she was a young girl. They are guarded by men who don't speak. They have no idea why they are there. They don't remember getting there. They can't leave. It's just an odd situation, and I kind of don't want to say anything more than that. And it's a strange book because there's not really much plot, there's not really much like character development. It's more about the ideas, I think, but I still enjoyed the vibes somehow, even though there's like zero content to talk about. There was a lot of musings about our main character. It's about her kind of friendships with the other people who she lives with, but even then it doesn't really delve much into it. It stayed on my mind for a few days and it just left me with a strange sort of bleak, depressed feeling. But I liked it, which is odd because I like this book for all the same reasons that I didn't like The Memory Police, because The Memory Police gave me like nothing and this gave me even less, but I liked it more. But the reason that I'm giving it 3.5 is because it left me thinking about it a lot, but I feel like there was nothing for me to really grab onto and really love. The characters were just sort of there. There's not much description into anything, which for some reason I really enjoyed, but not enough to say it was like groundbreaking for me. So I think a 3.5 is probably where I'm at with it. The next one I also don't have because I read it on my Kindle, but that is Birthday by Meredith Russo. This is a YA contemporary story about 2 best friends. Our main character is called Morgan and I can't remember the other guy's name, but they are best friends and we follow them on one day of the year on their birthday. So we follow like one chapter from each friend. I think we follow from when they're 13 to like 18 or something. And Morgan feels like he might be transgender and he might want to transition from being male to female, and he also feels like he has a crush on his friend. So a lot of this book is about Morgan's identity and how he presents himself to the world, how he struggles to fit in, and also trying to navigate this crush he has on his best friend who he's known since he was literally born. So I really liked this one. It was very quick to read, it was very sweet and wholesome, and I really liked the romance in this. I liked seeing their journeys together and also separately as well, and I felt so deeply for Morgan. I really wanted to see them thrive, and anytime they were sad, I was sad. And it does get kind of dark for a YA, I think. There is some mention of self-harm tendencies and suicidal thoughts, but I did love the overall insight into a person who feels like they might be transgender The author themselves is transgender, is a trans female, so I really appreciated that perspective because I don't think I've read anything from a perspective of a trans person. However, I did see some slightly problematic things about this author, so you might want to just have a look at that before you go into this. I only found out once I'd read it, and I'm not sure I would have read it if I knew what the allegations were. I will let you, do your research with that. So yeah, that did kind of make me feel a bit like icky about it. But for what it is, I did like it. It was sweet, and I really liked being able to read a story from that perspective. The next one that I have here is another Lisa Jewell to add to my little collection, and this one is I Found You, which I think is a slightly older one. I think it was published in like 2016. This was typical Lisa Jewell for me. I really like the characters in her books. I feel like they're pretty well fleshed out for, your typical mystery thriller. And in this book we're following Alice, who finds this random man on the beach and she invites him to stay with her, but she doesn't really know anything about this guy, and he's suffering from some sort of amnesia. And her kids, I think she's got like 3 or 4 kids, her kids are like, "Mum, what the hell, you're so destructive and chaotic and we don't like this." So we've got some interesting family dynamics where Alice may not be the best mum. Then we're also getting a different perspective from this woman who's really young and her new husband has gone missing. And then another perspective we're getting is from like 20 years in the past or something, and we're following this family who are on holiday in the same town that like the beach is in. So we've got quite a lot going on in this book, but this particular book has a really big font. I think like it's quite easy to read. I sped through it. It's very engaging. It's not like tons of twists and turns, but it does have a lot of good ends to chapters where you just want to keep going. The bad guy in this book is totally horrible and awful, so I really enjoyed hating on him. I did think the main character, Alice's kids, were pretty undeveloped and I could not tell you their names, so not all the characters were as well developed as I'm used to with Lisa Jewell, so I could kind of tell it was like an earlier book, and the ones that she's published since I think I've liked more. But this does have a really good twist, and the way that it all comes together is really interesting, if a little bit like unbelievable, but it was still a good time. It's definitely one that is good for like summer, where you just want to read something like really quick, but it's just not a new favourite for me. My next 3.5 rating is The Familiar Dark by Amy Engel. I love the cover of this book. I bought it from America. I absolutely adore like these kinds of books. I've bought quite a few now. They're a little bit bigger. They are floppy and they've got like really nice backs. I recently bought Boy Parts when I was in Paris last week, so I have quite a few books now in this like style. So I was hoping that I'd like it a little bit more than a 3.5, but it was still alright. This one is about a woman called Eve who's just lost her daughter. And the first chapter of this book is so emotional and so sad, because we're following from like the daughter's perspective, I think, and yeah, it was just very, very heartbreaking. And then we start following from her mum's perspective as she finds out about her daughter's murder, and she starts her own little investigation into what could have happened to her. And she also has this toxic relationship with her mum, and the setting in this book is really interesting because it refers to it a lot as like a white trash, trailer trash area, where it's very like seedy underbelly of America. It was just an interesting town to read about. A lot of this book we're following Eve as she's grieving, and it's very emotional. It's well written, but I didn't find it super exciting. I didn't think the plot moved as fast as I would have liked it to. The ending was fine. It was one of those like confessional things that I don't really love, but it did feel like a very dark book, and yeah, it was fine. But I'm trying to be a little bit harsher with my reviews because I gave loads of thrillers like 4 stars, and I was looking back on them and I was like, are these all actually 4 stars? Like, have I thought about them since? And I still think 3.5 is a good rating, but I was giving way too many books 4 stars, and I feel like 4 stars is like, I love this book, I'm going to recommend it. And I don't think I could say that about this. Like, it was good, and if you want to read it then sure, read it, but I don't think I would say that I loved it, or I would like push it down people's throats, you know? And then our last 3.5 of this video. I think I gave it a 4 star in the reading vlog, but I have since moved it down to a 3.5, and that is The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This is the finale in the Broken Earth trilogy, and it took me so long to read this, so I really thought it would be a 5 star because I reread the first 2 and they were 5 stars, whereas this one I soft DNF'd it once, gave it a couple of weeks, started it up again, really struggled through the same bit again. I loved how it all came together in the end, and I think it ended perfectly, but it just wasn't as engaging as I found the first two. I did still tab quite a lot of it though, as you can see. It still has like beautiful writing. It was just a little bit disappointing. I wouldn't say that I loved this book, and I wouldn't say it was anywhere as good as like the first one, even the second one, which is a lot of people's like hit and miss one. This whole trilogy is a little bit on the slower side anyway, but yeah, this one just felt especially slow. But all the things that I still love about the fifth season, like the characters, the world, all that is still there. Just the plot, I think with this one, I just wasn't really in love with. But I did like how it all came together. We got all the answers, and it does feel like a very complete trilogy. I would still highly recommend it. But yeah, I don't know, something with this one just felt a little bit not quite there, and yeah, I was a little bit disappointed with it, but it was still enjoyable. I just thought I would be like, wow, that was spectacular, and unfortunately I wasn't. Now we're going on to our 4-star books. The first one I have here is Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier. Again, I think this was a 5-star prediction, and it was close, it was very close, but unfortunately the final twist kind of put me off a bit. I didn't really love it. This is a book about a girl called Jewell. 5 years ago, Jewell's ex-boyfriend from when she was a teenager was found to be a serial killer, and she gets caught out as helping him kill his first victim, and she ends up going to prison for like the first little bit of this book, and then we're following her mainly after prison as similar murders start happening again. And then we're also following back in the past when she first meets this boyfriend, and just about their like toxic relationship and about how this best friend's murder actually happens. Can you tell I love a book where murders are involved and then later on murders start happening again? Like, I feel like that's a running theme in this video. This one was interesting. It was dark, it was messed up, it was very thrilling, engaging. I didn't really want to put it down. My favourite bits were the flashbacks with Gio and her boyfriend as they first met, and seeing how swept up she gets in this romance, and then her relationship with her friend, and then how her death comes about was just really interesting. The present day chapters were less interesting to me. I did like the kind of romance that was going on though, which is not like me at all. I don't really like romance in my thrillers. However, with this one, there was an odd amount of sexual violence towards women. I can think of 3 instances, I think, where that is like mentioned on page. So if you're a bit sensitive to that, then just be warned of that. And yeah, as I said, the final twist was just a little bit like, I just found it a tiny bit unbelievable, and I thought the bad person was a little bit cheesy again. I thought that entire scene where like this ending happens was just very odd. Like, the dialogue was really weird. Like, who actually talks like that? I don't know. That was the only thing that let it down, but other than that, I really loved this book. It was dark, gritty, engaging, and I like the characters, so it was almost a 5-star. But have I actually predicted any of them right so far? I think I've read quite a few from that video, and I'm not sure that any of them are actually 5-star. But let's move on. So the next one that I also rated 4 stars was Snap by Belinda Bauer. Now, I also read this in the same reading vlog that I've already mentioned, so again, I'll whiz through this really quickly. In this book, we're following Jack and his 2 younger siblings. When they were younger, they broke down on the motorway, and their mum walks off to go and find a phone so she can ring for some help, and she never comes back. So these kids are basically fending for themselves. We're also following some detectives who are investigating some burglaries. For me, this book read a lot like a film. I don't really know why, because it's not action-packed or anything, but I just think it would make a really good like suspense film. The characters were really well written, I was fully invested in them, and especially towards the end, I felt this book got really like fast-paced, and I was genuinely concerned about what was going to happen. There's nothing that I didn't really like about this book, but for some reason it didn't give me a 5-star feeling. I really liked the ending and how everything wrapped up. It also turned into a little bit of a cat and mouse thriller, which is something that I don't normally like. And overall, I just thought it was a really solid book. I think it was also nominated for the Booker Prize, so if you want something a little bit more literary fiction feeling, then this one might be good for you. Next up, we have my 4.5 star of the video, and it is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. Look at what I've done to this book. That's fake tan. Literally, like, the tiniest splodge went on it, and it's just completely ruined it. And I actually bought this book full price at Waterstones, which I don't often do, so I'm very upset, and I'm not really sure how to fix it. I think it might just be there forever now. But anyway, I really liked this book. I did put it in my 5-star prediction video again, and it was so close, so close. So this book is about a married couple. We've got Leah and Miri. So Leah went off on this deep sea expedition, and she was only meant to be gone for like 2 weeks or something, and then it's only 6 months later that she returns. And Miri is very confused because Leah doesn't seem to be acting the way she normally would. There's not really any answers as to why she was there for 6 months and not 2 weeks. And Miri is just really struggling with this because Leah feels like a completely different person, and it feels like their marriage is really struggling from this. This is another odd book, which is really beautifully written. At times it felt a little bit too pretentious for me. I do feel like I'm oversensitive to that, so I might be being a little unfair on it, but sometimes I read things and I think, oh god, a little bit of an eye roll worthy moment, or like when a theme kind of comes back at the end of a chapter in a way that I think is meant to be meaningful, but for me it just feels a bit like, try hard. There were a few moments like that, but for the most part this book was really beautiful. Just the way it talks about the ocean itself was just stunning, but also really terrifying. There's a bit where it mentions how the ocean is very different to being on the moon, because if astronauts left a footprint on the moon, the next time the astronauts went back there would probably still be that footprint there. But if somebody did that on the ocean floor, the ocean is constantly moving, there's constantly life down there, that footprint would be washed away within moments. And that really freaked me out because there's such a big percentage of the ocean that is unexplored, and that's freaky because that's just on our planet and we like don't know the half of it. The ocean is a very frightening place, and I think this book captures that really well, but also in a very like gorgeously written way. I loved the relationship between Leah and Miri and how we've got these flashbacks into what they used to be like, and just the simplicity of like domestic life. And there's nothing like super spectacular about the romance or anything. It just feels like a normal couple doing normal things, and she loves like normal things about her. Like, it's just a nice feeling book. We also get to see Leah's perspective as well from some of the time that she's in the ocean. Not a ton, but that was really interesting as well. The ending of this book made me cry a little bit, and I couldn't stop thinking about it afterwards, because it's not the most satisfying book in terms of you don't get all the answers. A lot of it is kind of left up to you to decide what's going on, but it's one where I liked that and it just made me think a lot. So it was very close to a 5-star, but for some reason it just didn't feel fully there. But I still really love this one, and I'm glad that I loved it as much as I thought I would, because I really hyped this book up for myself. And it also had some really good horror in here. Some of it was really creepy, and then some of it was also really sad. Like, it's a very sad horror. I think this book is categorized as a horror, but it's very like literary horror, I think. But it was fab, and I would definitely recommend it. And finally, people, we're on to our 5 stars. So in the last 3 or whatever months it is, I've got 3 5 stars. I'm gonna go from like my least favourite to my most favourite, if that counts, even though they're all 5 stars. So the first one I have here is I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jennette McCurdy. So I mentioned at the start that I don't really rate non-fictions, but if I'm going to give this a 5 star, then I may as well give it a 5 star. Like, why not boost that rating on Goodreads? I expected to love this one, so I'm glad I did. Everyone loves it. I feel like I'm a little bit late to the party because everyone was reading this like last year, and I've only just got around to reading it, but it was as amazing as I expected it to be. Obviously, if you've not heard of this book already, this is Jennette McCurdy's autobiography. She was on iCarly, which I never actually watched, but this is the story of how she got into child acting, which was mainly to please her mum, who she's got this very toxic relationship with, and then the problems that kind of stem from that, mainly to do with problem drinking and having eating disorders. So if you're struggling with any kind of eating issues, then please be wary of this book, because it does talk about eating disorders quite a lot, sometimes in quite graphic detail, so just be wary before you start this one. But this was just so interesting, I could not put it down. I also listened to the audiobook, which was amazing because it's also narrated by Jennette McCurdy herself. The chapters are really short and just show like little snippets into her life about how her whole life has been set up to please her mum, and her mum was very emotionally manipulative and made her feel like her appearance was like her only worth. And it's only later in life that Jennette realises this, so it's really interesting to see her come to that realisation, when now you can see it so clearly from the start that that's, you know, what their relationship was. Although I never watched iCarly, I was looking at like pictures of her from around that time and like looking at clips, and it's so jarring to think about how she's playing this really funny character when in her personal life she had so many struggles. She just has such a good voice. Like her writing is very personable, very engaging. You just instantly like her, and she's had such an interesting life already, and she's still very, very young, and she's obviously been through a lot. So yeah, this was amazing. I thought about it so much afterwards, and yeah, it definitely deserves all the hype that it's getting, or has got. It's kind of past its hype times now, but you know, still deserves it. The last two books I want to talk about are very, very similar, and the reason why I read the second one that I'm going to talk about is because I love the first one so much. So the first one I have here is The Appeal by Janice Hallett, which again I read in that reading vlog, so if you watch that then you might have already seen me talk about this. This is about this really quiet small town where every year they put on this theatre performance because they've got this little amateur dramatics group. Basically, the guy who is the director of this group, his granddaughter has just been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. So he decides to turn this play into a bit of a fundraiser, and then at some point during this time, somebody gets killed and somebody is in prison for it. But this lawyer thinks that whoever's in prison has been wrongly accused and it's a miscarriage of justice. And this lawyer basically presents you with a case file with a bunch of emails and leaflets and text messages and stuff. So the whole book basically is written in like little emails between these townspeople, and your job is to figure out who the real killer is, but you also don't know from the start like who's been killed and who's in prison. This is one of those books where I don't think you could actually work it out based on what you get told. The twists at the end were very surprising, and I genuinely don't think I would ever have been able to predict it, but in that sense I enjoyed it because I wasn't expecting to like guess it myself, and a lot of the time I don't like being able to do that. But this book was like the most fun I've had in such a long time. It's so quick because of the format of it. So I've realised that I love mixed media books. They just feel really fast paced, really interesting. I just could not put it down. I was just so invested. I'm the kind of person who loves a gossip, and this book feels like just getting gossip the whole way through because you're just getting to peek at these people's emails and see how they all bitch about each other. You also get to read the law students discussing their theories and them asking questions and talking about who they trust and stuff. And even though this book is like 450 pages, I flew through it in like 2 days because of just how engrossed I was in it. I was just desperate to find out what was happening. I loved the ending. Everything came together perfectly, and I literally could not fault it. Had the best time. It was just really fun, and I'd just had a bit of a slump with like reading The Stone Sky, which I didn't really love, Sapiens, which was a really long book. So to get into something like this was such a good way to like break up those chunkier books. I literally loved it, and I've now added like every single Janice Hallett book onto my TBR, and it's also the reason why I read my favourite book of the year so far, possibly. I feel a little bit embarrassed to talk about my state of mind whilst reading this last book because it turned me into an unhinged person. So this book is True Crime Story by Joseph Knox. It just sounded interesting because it's a mix of fiction and non-fiction, where it's written as if it's a true crime story, but it's actually a made-up story. Most of it is told in interview transcripts with all these different people, so it is a little bit similar to The Appeal in that way. And then we also get the odd like newspaper article, photograph, editor's notes, and the editor talking to the like original writer of this book. This book is about the disappearance of a girl called Zoe Nolan, who's a fictional University of Manchester student. She's in her first year, she's living in halls, and after this Christmas party she is never seen again. One of the characters in this book, Evelyn, is very fascinated by this story, and she basically goes back and interviews like all the people that were involved years later so that she can write this book. And then something happens to Evelyn herself, so our author Joseph Knox decides to take all of her material and like continue what she did. So he is a character in this book as well. This book took over my life for like 2-3 days. I started reading it on the way back from Paris. I got home and I was like, right, I need to write out some notes. So let me just show you the notes that I wrote for this book. So I basically wrote like every chapter, and I wrote notes and my thoughts, and decided who I thought was going to be the killer. Like, what the actual hell is this? It took over my life. So I decided that I was going to try and predict who the killer was, and girls and boys, I did it. I actually predicted this book. And I know I said earlier that if I can predict a twist, it kind of takes me out of the book. But no, I was so proud of myself for this because you can actually work it out. But it was still like unexpected. Like, it took me right till the end of the book to be able to work it out. It goes right from like Zoe's life as a child and the mysterious things going on there, and then there's the time at university before she goes missing, then there's like afterwards and things that happen later on. But yeah, I was very impressed with myself, very impressed with this book, because like I loved the appeal, don't get me wrong, but you could never work this out. And like the premise is almost like, oh, try and work this out. You couldn't. This one you can. So depends. If you want to try and be like a little investigator, then either of these will work, but this one especially. I got lost in this world. It reminded me of being back at uni. The Halls vibes were just immaculate. I'm such a nosy bitch that seeing everyone talking about each other in these interviews was fascinating, and I was trying to pick out like who was lying and who was saying things just because they were like emotional or angry or hiding something. So it was literally the most fun thing ever. Also, this book got really, really creepy. Like, some of the stuff that happens was genuinely frightening. When everything comes out as to like what's happening, I was terrified. I was petrified, okay? It's a very creepy book, but yeah, honestly, it was fab. I got this book from the library because I was drawn to that beautiful hot pink font, and then I started reading it on my Kindle while I was away because I didn't take it with me. And then I basically read all of it on my Kindle because I was able to highlight the bits that I wanted to talk about in my little notes. And I was highlighting like every single page, just like, oh, he said this, like, oh, this doesn't add up, blah, 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 blah. And it kind of made me feel like, you know, that guy who does like the Pretty Little Liars recaps? That's how I felt when I was like doing this. And I said to my boyfriend like, oh, I'm just going to read some of this book while I like drink a cup of tea. And it was like probably about an hour later. And I was like, I've not even started reading yet. I've just been writing. I've been taking up my notes. I've been theorising. And I think he was a bit concerned for me. The twists, amazing. Like, some of it completely floored me. Some of it I worked out, but still floored me, like, as I realised what was happening. There was just the right amount of, like, things left open as well, I think. Which might annoy some people, but it was, like, perfect for me. This book was perfect. And that, my friends, is every single book that I've read since March. I feel like I've been sat here for about 2 hours. I probably have. I'm also sorry for my lack of videos. I have tried to film some reading vlogs and then I've deleted them because I didn't like them. I really need to stop doing that. Let me know if you've read any of these books before and what you thought of them. Give this video a like if you liked it and subscribe if you want to see more. And I'll hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!